Okay, so what we're going to go through now is trimming, which is the last piece of making your piece. So what I've done, just with my needle tool, I've made 3 markings about 1/3 of the way around the base each. So 1, 2, 3, and that just helps us see where to move the pot, and I'll show you that in a second. So I'm going to trim this piece. This piece the bush chickens got into it a little bit while I was in Byron, but this is a black mid-fire clay, and regardless of what clay you're using, the process is the same. You want to have your bucket with some water handy. Now this is a little bit drier than what I'd like, so I'll show you one that's in a different video with how it should come off nice and easily, but I'll show you the difference and how to put a bit more moisture into your pot here. You can always sit this on a sponge or something to rehydrate it if it's gone too dry. You can also get a spray bottle and spray water around it. So we're going to put it roughly in the middle. The tools that you need are your trimming tools, which is this one, so it's square up one end, round up the other. So those are the trimming tools that I think you guys have in your kits. So excuse for a second, you might not see my face. Maybe I'll just put it up a little bit. Hold on. Let's put it up that way so you can still see it. So again, this is just a recap if you've been doing my course. So we will have run through this already. So I'm just going to turn my wheel on. Oh, I just haven't got a towel. I'll just quickly get myself a towel and come back. Alrighty, so we've got a dry wheel head, nice and clean, because we want to put the trimmings in a separate spot to what you've got your slops if you're keeping it separately at home. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a really slow wheel. I'm just holding my hand. This is the way that I hold it. I put my elbows, tuck my elbows in again, and I just sit it really close to where the piece is. So as the piece comes around, it's going to touch my hand. So at the moment it's touching between 1 and 3. So I'm going to turn 1 and 3 towards me and give it a little push away. So then I'm going to do it again. And now it's between 1 and 3 again. So another little push. Remember when you're doing this is more at 3 now, so 3 goes towards me, give it a little push. Remember when you're doing this, you have to work out where you're going to center your piece from. Usually it's from the bottom, but if you've forgotten to trim off the bottom, or if your piece is a little bit off center and a little bit skewed, just work out where you're going to center it from. Usually it's somewhere near the bottom. If you can't do right at the bottom, do a little bit down from the bottom, or just a little bit here, so that it's relatively centered when it's sitting down. And what we're going to do is we're going to trim it and make it nice and even around. So that's pretty good where it is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get either my recycled clay or the new clay, and I'm going to make myself a bit of a sausage. Make sure you hold your pot when you do this, otherwise you're going to move your pot and take it off center again. Now as you put this on, make sure you're just going from one side, because if you put gaps in it, it's going to push your piece off. So just from one side, and pushing it down. Now this piece, if you don't quite get all the way around, no biggie, just fill in the gap. Okay, then once you've got to that point, now this will dry out really quickly because it's only a little bit of clay, so make sure you pop that back in and wrap it up. Now just to make sure that that's no air gaps, just spin your wheel and put your finger just slowly and to push it in. Then you should, if there's a wobble, this has actually got a wobble, unfortunately, give it another little spin around, see if you can push it in, and then see if that fixes it. That's fixed it. Okay, so let's just push it in a little bit more. Sometimes you'll just have to start that process 100% from scratch. Okay, because that shouldn't move. Okay, so now this piece is a little bit drier than what I'd like. So I'm just going to put the wheel on full, and I'm just going to wet it lightly with the sponge. I don't want to empty a lot of water on this like we do when we centre, because too much water will drip down. And the reason that these two clays don't stick together is because they're at different moisture levels. So if we wet this, it'll drip down and your piece will stick to the clay that we're using to hold it onto the wheel, and it can also stick to the wheel head. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit of water onto it, and then I'm going to grab my trimming tools. Now I'm going to start with the rounded tool in the middle of my piece. So when you make a piece, when you trim it, on the bottom, what a good idea is for it to be a little bit concave, so that it sits on the edges, it'll sit nice and flat on the table. So the rounded spot, elbows are tucked in again, and I'm holding my hands really nice and steady. I hold mine like this, some people hold it like that. You get used to however it works for you, but elbows are tucked in. Again, I'm leaning forward, I'm not doing this with my arms. So I'm just starting in the middle, and one of the big things to do when you're trimming is to make sure you do it nice and slowly. Okay? If you're doing it too quickly, you'll end up with lots of divots in your piece. And you may want that, and I'll show you how to do that later, but just for now, we want to be able to do it nice and smoothly. So the clay, we're just going to go all the way to the edge. The clay should come off like chocolate, okay? So I'm going to do a few more of these. Now before you put your piece on, what's a good idea is to check how thick your piece is. If you've got any spots that are thin, that you know that you don't want to trim too much. Also how thick it is on the bottom, so you know how much to trim off the bottom. And as you go along, you'll learn how much you can take off. Now, I'm going to want to create a bit of a footing. So all I'm doing now with my rounded tool is I'm going nearly all the way to the edge, just not quite. Now these mugs were actually made quite a while ago, and what I did was I had them wrapped up in plastic. So when it gets to the point where they're leather hard and ready to trim, if you're not ready to trim them yet, you can wrap them up in plastic, and that will stop it drying out anymore. Now I know these mugs are quite thick compared to what I would usually make, so I've got a fair bit to trim off. Now when you're starting out, it's good to start with the smaller tools, just because you're taking less clay off at a time, so it's easier to hold it still. As you progress along, you can use the bigger tool, and that will give you more of a a straighter edge. Now, if you get that horrible, which you just had a little bit of, it's potentially that your clay is too dry. But see how this is coming off really nicely like grated chocolate? That's how you want your piece to, you want these to come off like. If they're too small, if it's like grinding, making a sound, or if it's just tiny little bits, you need to add some more water, okay? Like I did at the start. And it doesn't matter if you start at the top or the bottom or the bottom or the top, it's completely up to you. Now your piece, if it's not completely symmetrical, will bounce around a little bit. So what you want to make sure is that that's just come off. So I'm going to have to redo that. So we're going to start from scratch again. That's going to go in this pile, okay? So when, if that happens, if it gets loose, you just need to do your 3 again. So this is a good opportunity actually where I would sit and I'd feel my piece. And I'd say, okay, you know, I'm probably at the thickness that I want it to be at the bottom there, okay? The bottom's got a little bit on it, but not too much. So when I do this next time, I'm just going to do some little divots in it because I really want it to stay that sort of thickness. I don't want to take too much more off, okay? You can, if you want to, if your piece is not okay for trimming on the wheel, you can come along and you can trim some of it by hand. If you're doing it by hand, I'd recommend using the bigger tool rather than the smaller tool because you can get longer strokes, okay? And you just go along and you trim it off because some pieces, either the shape or just the way that you've made it, you may not be able to trim it on the wheel, okay? So you just go along and trim it out like this. Alright. Now if you want to make any texture, anything like that on your piece, this is where you would do it now. So if you want to make a pattern, you cut it in now. If you wanted to make it ripped, all you do is grab, well, not wire, but grab this one or this one, and you put it on an edge as you go down, and that will create that sort of nice rippled in effect, okay? So the other thing you can do, I'm not going to put this back on the wheel. I think I'm just going to keep it as it is like this. I'll just turn the wheel off so we can hear it a bit better. The other thing you can do at the end is to just smooth it over, like this one the bush turkey's got on the inside here and around the rim. So what I'm going to do, you don't do this before you put it on the wheel because any clay that's got too much moisture will actually stick to the wheel and we don't want it to stick to the wheel, okay? So what I'm going to do is, you can see there's another little marking in there, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm going to try and smooth that over as well, so that it's not as prevalent. Now as you do this and add water, it's going to create, your piece is going to become a lot softer. So you can move it around, but also beware that you could push it out of shape that you want it to be as well, okay? So I like my pieces a bit raw, so I'm just going to leave it pretty much like that. I'm just going to try and get another little scraping out of there. These bush turkeys really got into my work. So if you wanted to mold it into a jug at this point, or make it into a little bit more of a different shape, this is where you can do it, okay? Make sure too that when you're doing that, that you're just aware that you don't want to push it too much out of shape. Okay, clay does have memory, and sometimes it will go back into the shape that it was before. Okay, so there we go, that's basically your piece. And then the last little thing to do is to make sure that you put your marking on it. So upside down, I'm not going to put this piece back on here because it will stick to it now that it's nice and wet. So I'm going to get, I'm just trying to find my needle tool. It kind of feels like a kid's video, you know, when they say, where's my needle tool? Can you see it? It's not this one. It's not this one. Anyway, I can't find it. But if I did, you know that I put my markings on the bottom of my piece. Even if you think it's amazingly so distinct that you'll know it, do it anyway. So I'm going to put my markings on my piece. Make sure that it's going to sit flat on your table or whatever, and that's it. Then you're going to leave it dry until it's 100% dry, so that it's ready to go into the bisque firing. And that's your process. See ya.